Hello, my name is Lucas, this is a bit of lit, and I want to talk to you about the first part of 6 parts for J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. This is for the 50th anniversary 1-volume edition, and it's great, good fun. I absolutely love it. Lord of the Rings is a series I read just about every year, and I've read it. This is my 6th time? I haven't read it too many times for reading it every year. There have been times that I have skipped just because I hadn't felt like it, but it's hard to not feel in the mood for this fantastic book. Recently I read The Hobbit to reintroduce myself to this world and refamiliarize myself with Tolkien's work in that, which is great. Not nearly to the depth and scale of Lord of the Rings, but it is a fantastic story, well told, well paced, overall excellent and nice, clean prose, great tenor, and these kind of things. We see it so much more in this book. It's just excellent. The world building is phenomenal. But we're going to talk about the first part, in which we get the prologue, which tells us about Hobbit culture and Hobbit history, and reminds us of the events of The Hobbit. And sort of has this meta-textual moment where Tolkien talks about how there was a red book that has There and Back Again, or The Hobbit, that was originally released, that had this story that Bilbo had made up, until eventually he had finally told the truth to some people, Gandalf, Frodo. And I recommend not reading the prologue. It's just not worth it. It's not a great way to start your epic fantasy. In a way, it does its job of grounding you in the world and letting you know that there's a rich history, and letting you know that the story is going to focus on unassuming folk that are not necessarily destined to greatness, but are thrust into it. So that's nice. It helps you bear with that, but ultimately it can be completely skipped. As well as another part, which we will get to. But then, chapter 1, in my opinion, one of the best chapters ever. Beginning chapters. It is about Bilbo's 11th birthday, which he's sharing with Frodo, and their combined age will be 144. Bilbo, knowing this, invites 144 guests to his birthday, whole gross, if you will, which is an offensive thing in Hobbit culture, apparently, and for his birthday, he's giving gifts and getting gifts, and because he's supremely wealthy from his adventures with the dwarves in The Hobbit, he tends to get new things for people, though apparently in Hobbit culture it is common to re-gift, and no one is offended, because it's always somebody's birthday and there's always a gift to give. Yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic storytelling. Because he has this birthday party and he's got a special surprise in which he vanishes in front of everybody after sort of insulting them and boring them with his long speech. They just want to hear the usual stuff and then drink to his health and this kind of thing. And he vanishes and everyone gets upset. He has a good laugh, and he has planned this with Gandalf to leave everything behind for Frodo, including the One Ring that he found 50 years prior, or 60 years prior, when he was a young man, and going out on an adventure in The Hobbit. But he has a difficult time letting go, and he starts to call it things that the previous owner called it, namely, my precious, and he becomes very defensive, but he lets go of it. And all throughout this, everything that, all the dialogue and everything, the first chapter does such a great job of making you wonder, what is with this ring? Who is gonna be in danger? What kind of danger are they gonna be in? What's Frodo gonna do next? What will Bilbo do next? How will Frodo handle the ring? Why is it so dangerous? What is Mordor? Who is... I guess you don't know who Sauron is yet, but... why is Gandalf so worried? He's gonna go, okay, when is he gonna come back? These kind of things. In chapter 2 we get more. We get a lot of backstory. Very good info dumping, but not... it's a lot to handle after the first chapter, in a way. We learn about the origins of the ring and the danger Frodo's in and how he should leave. And mind you, this is 17 years later. What I really appreciate about it is that, Gandalf is this wise old wizard man. And he has his suspicions about the ring, but he doesn't really know. He knows of the ring, but he doesn't know what they're dealing with. And he has to do research, and he has to go find Gollum, which we learn about more, and his journey since he lost the ring, and about how he came across it, and how he justified his actions in the process of getting the ring and killing Deagol, and because it was his birthday gift, because it was his birthday when he was Smeagol, and Deagol found it. And I just really love that. Like, it's a tried and true trope. There are many, many derivatives of Gandalf. Not to say that Gandalf is the first, but he is an excellent example of it. Of this grand old wizard, intelligent old man. But he still has to do research to make sure, absolutely certain. And he knows the dangers of holding this ring himself, given that he is basically all-powerful. Because magic is not clearly defined in this series, which is totally fine. And he leaves it in the hands of Frodo, but lets him know that he may have to skedaddle. And so Frodo does, far sooner than he thought he would need to. And he has to make plans to make it look like he's not just disappearing, because there are strange folk looking for Baggins, Baggins, they're looking for Bilbo, not Frodo. And he ends up leaving with some friends, with Pippin and Samwise Gamgee, and later Merry. There's also Fatty Bolger, who stays behind to let everybody know that Frodo is just kind of in hiding right now. Not in hiding, but he's around in his new place. He's sold his place in the Shire, his old hole that Bilbo left behind, to the Saxville Bagginses, who are detestable people, from what we are told. And another thing that I really love, the trope that Frodo satisfies and fulfills. He's not the first, but he is very much derived from. He is the kind of character that is very unassuming, very, very sort of meek and powerless and not special. But he is made to be a little bit different than everybody, right? He is the heir of Bilbo, who is an odd hobbit himself. He starts to feel restless and yearns for adventure, which no hobbits generally do, at the same age that Bilbo was, 50. And, he sort of takes on this great danger because he has to, and he doesn't want it. And, he has this great conversation with Gandalf, about how he doesn't want this, but Gandalf reminds him and lets him know that, so do all who come to see such a time, or something like that. I don't remember exactly the quote, but like, he still takes responsibility, and he's afraid, and he doesn't want it, but he doesn't say things like, "What? Me? It can't be. Not me. I'm just a lowly old hobbit." These kind of things that you see in the derivatives of Frodo. He just, he says, "I must do this. I don't want to, but it must be done." And I really appreciate that about Frodo. I think it's great. So, anyway, moving on. The story, all these hobbits get together, and they've sort of planned to go with Frodo, who has planned to go by himself, mind you, except with Sam, I guess. He has planned to go by himself, but all these people have been conspiring and sort of taking notes and trying to figure out what's the deal and how can they help Frodo and how can they help him along the journey to, they're going to Rivendell. Fatty Bolger, like I said, he's the one to stay behind to let the Shire know, don't worry about Frodo, until people finally realize he is not there anymore. This will give him time to escape. Merry, Pippin, Sam, and Frodo try to take a shortcut through the woods, which is very dangerous, and the tone of the story, the tone of the narration changes completely and all throughout, and this is after we get this introduction of the Black Riders looking around, searching for him, sniffing around on these black horses. Really cool. And they come across a tree, a sort of sentient tree in this sentient forest, and, spies and everywhere, and beasts and these kind of things listening. And this tree sort of traps all the hobbits, and then exactly nothing of interest happens for 2.5 chapters. And finally, after they get out of the forest, they make it to Bree. You can skip everything that happens after the oak tree starts entrapping the hobbits, because once the oak tree is sung into submission by this old man who is unaffected by the ring, you've gone too far. You can just skip. Okay, you might be thinking, you're not a true fan if you can't suffer through these chapters. And you're taking a shortcut, but I remind you, the shortcut led to this situation. We're taking the long way, in a sense, and reading the parts that are worth reading. Okay? So, it's a shortcut, but actually, we don't need that. And had we just taken the road we could have taken, even though it's more dangerous, we would have been fine. Alright? They make it to Bree, and there's all kinds of strange folk, the Black Riders, looking around, Butterburs, Prancing Pony, in Bree, and they're there to rest. Butterbur, of course, knows of some hobbits, but he can't remember anything, because he just has a terrible memory. And they sort of relax a little bit, have some drinks, and celebrate the night with these other people. And all of a sudden, Pippin is talking a lot. And that worries Frodo, but then he starts singing along. He's a little bit worried about what Pippin's going to say. Maybe he's going to reveal something. Frodo is no longer going by Mr. Frodo Baggins, but by the name Mr. Underhill. And suddenly, he sort of slips while he's singing, and he puts his finger into the ring, and he disappears, and he scurries off under the table next to Strider, who is this man who's been in the corner eyeing them carefully. Of course, Strider is Aragorn. And with that, everyone is suspicious. We know we've got Bill Ferny and some other people who are not exactly good or honest people. We don't really see them do too much, but we get some ideas about how Bill Ferny is not a great person because he's not been treating his animal well. And he's known to be sort of an evil figure in the town of Bree. But there are other figures too, of course, who are talking and looking for Baggins and looking for information, willing to sell things out for a little bit of, you know, whatever they're looking for. Strider takes him away and talks with him and, you know, has a conversation with the hobbits, except Mary, who's out somewhere. And says you need to exercise more caution because what are you doing? This is a dangerous situation. You're in danger. What are you doing? He doesn't say it quite like that, but he has to prove himself. He sort of tries to make himself seem as a trustworthy person, though he doesn't look it. And Frodo starts asking the right questions and saying the right things, putting out his doubts, and Strider starts trusting in him more and starts revealing more about himself, about who he is and who he knows and this kind of thing. And they start to come to an agreement that I will tell you everything I know as long as you let me help you get to Rivendell. Because Strider has been under the employ, not under the employ, but in league with Gandalf to search for Gollum earlier, as we heard, but he went by the name Aragorn. The innkeep, Mr. Butterbur, comes in to let the hobbits know that he remembered something, that the landlord, Mr. Butterbur, is quite funny. These black men, said the landlord, lowering his voice, they're looking for Baggins, and if they mean well, then I'm a hobbit. It was on Monday, and all the dogs were yammering, and the geese screaming. Uncanny, I called it. Nob, he came and told me that 2 black men were at the door asking for a hobbit called Baggins. Nob's hair was all stood on end. I bid the black fellows be off and slammed the door on them, but they've been asking the same question all the way to Archet, I hear, and that ranger, Strider, he's been asking questions too. Tried to get in here to see you before you'd had a bite or a sup, he did. This is shortly after he's revealed that he remembers he was looking for a Baggins that would go by Underhill, because he'd been told by Gandalf, and he had a letter that he never got around to sending out, which is another thing I appreciate about Gandalf. He really plans things out carefully and sort of has contingency plans for things not working out, and I just think like everything is sort of accounted for in a way, minus the prologue and minus those chapters about the singing the oak tree into submission. But of course, Strider shows himself and says, but I'm here, and I'm going to work with Mr. Underhill. And he says not to trust him, and Aragorn gives the greatest insult so far. Then who would... well, you know your own business, maybe, said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger. Then who would take... if I could read. Then who would you take up with? Asked Strider, a fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people shouted at him all day. They cannot stay in the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the black man off? Strider means business here, and they're in a lot of danger. Their ponies are missing, and they need to get out. They can't wait any longer, so they go off, and they're looking for Weathertop, where they're going to wait out and wait for Gandalf. Of course, this doesn't work out. And there's a lot of action going on, and Frodo gets hurt and he gets stabbed in the left shoulder, and then he's injured and fatally wounded until Aragorn can find an herb from the old men in the south from long ago that they brought over that only grew where they lived, and he crushes it up and he puts it in water and he cleans, puts it on the wound, and he puts it in water, and then he washes the wound in the left shoulder, and Frodo starts to feel better, and they've got a fortnight. That's another thing I really appreciate about it, is that you feel the sense of time, even just by the characters talking. You feel how long it's taking them, and their frustration and their fears of running out of food and this kind of thing, though Aragorn Strider is a ranger, so he will know how to take care of himself out in the wild. And he will be able to help the hobbits as well. And then, like every time when it gets serious, the tone changes and it gets more dangerous, and you feel fear for the characters and a sense of dread, and you're concerned for them about what's going to happen, and it's just so well written. But then, we have these moments of levity. Shortly after the healing, they are going through the forest, or going around, and they find where the old 3 trolls were from, the Hobbit that Gandalf came and stopped from cooking the 13 dwarfs and Bilbo, and they turned to stone, and even one has behind his left ear, if I remember right, a bird's nest. And in these moments, like, maybe it doesn't need to be there, but it is sort of nice to have these connections, and it's also sort of nice to have these lighter moments, because then we meet Gorfindel, and he's got bad news. The Black Riders are near, they're coming around, and he's gonna help them get to Rivendell. And so basically they have a mad dash to Rivendell, and they get across this river, which floods due to the power of Elrond, and washes away the Black Riders. And that was a lot of the rundown. I've skipped a few things that I wanted to say, but that's quite alright. My favorite part is definitely Strider's sass at the end there, but yeah, I just absolutely love this part. The ring sets out, as it's called, and that will be that, because this has gone on quite long enough, and I will see you for the next part in a couple days, I'm sure. Thank you so much for watching.